This episode is sponsored by The Path, the coach-guided membership designed to help you make alcohol small and irrelevant in your life by removing your true desire to grab that next drink. Our science-based, compassion-led program allows you not only to shift your behavior and your relationship around alcohol, but more importantly, uncover and reprogram your subconscious conditioning and neural connections that have been keeping you stuck for years. With daily live breakthrough coaching, an intimate and supportive community, regular peer-to-peer connection calls, and a complete vault of resources, this is where your path to total freedom and effortless enjoyment of your new way of life begins. Join us at nakedmindpath.com. Hi, this is Annie Grace, and this is This Naked Mind podcast, and I'm here with Mark. Welcome, Mark. Good to have you here.
It's great to be here, Annie. Thank you.
Awesome. So why don't you sort of take me back to the beginning for you? Where did it all start?
Back to the beginning. Okay. Well, like a lot of people you've probably talked to, the beginning for me was sometime around the early teen years. About the age of 14, I started drinking for the first time. And I was thinking about how to prepare for the conversation we were having today, and I realized that I remembered the first time that I actually got drunk, and it was an interesting experience. I went over to a friend's house in the same neighborhood that I lived in, and his parents had gone out for the night, and we raided the liquor cabinet as you do at that age. And the only thing that they really had, it was a Greek family, so they had a lot of ouzo, but we didn't really like that. But there was a big old bottle of gin in there. So we grabbed this bottle of gin and started drinking right out of the bottle, doing shots. And I think I made it like 6 in, and my friend just went to the bathroom, threw up, and he was done for the night. My experience was totally different. The stuff tasted awful, but the feeling I got after drinking it was like, I felt like Superman. Like I just had a rocket underneath me, and I really liked it. And I remember sitting there in the easy chair with him passed out in the room next to me thinking, I'm gonna do a little more of this. It seems like the thing that I'm gonna spend some time and invest some time in. And he got in trouble, I got in trouble, whatever. But that didn't really stop me. I mean, I went off to high school and met some friends there, and they and I would steal the beers from the dad's, cooler and whatnot, hide them in the woods, and then go drink them later. But that was pretty consistent. Although something I noticed even back then with my friends was, they'd have a couple, and we'd spend a couple hours messing around, and then they'd go home, and I'd go try and find more beer somewhere. Usually I was able to. Not hard to find beer in the early 80s. It was all over the place. Everybody had some at home. So, it got to the point where towards the end of high school, and I was a good student. I went to a good high school. It was a private Catholic school, all boys Catholic school. But towards the end there, occasionally my friends would have to carry me home from a party or something. And I remember one night when they brought me up and delivered me to my parents, my mother was like, "Why do you have to get this way?" And I said, I don't know. It's just, I like it. But I managed to hold it together. I graduated from high school, did very well. Went off to a Jesuit college in New York. And that's when sort of the wheels came off the bus for me with respect to drinking. It was the 80s. It was New York City, big party atmosphere. Then I started getting into cocaine when I got there. And that was something else that was, diverted me for a few years out of my life. But the thing about cocaine, and I realized this much later on, was I could count on one hand the amount of time I ever did cocaine if I hadn't been drinking first. And there were 2 times. The first time I bought it, and the second time like 20 minutes later when I bought it. But every other time I was drinking before. So my problem was always alcohol. Drugs were sort of a diversion off to the side. But I made it through that first semester with a rocking 0.0 average. The school decided to give me one more chance. I held it together to get through that next semester, and then I failed out the following semester after that. And it was all because of the drinking and the drugs. There was no, it wasn't that I wasn't capable of doing the work. I mean, it was just simply that, and that kind of sent me off on a spiral where I didn't do much of anything for the next 5 years or so, other than just go to parties. I stayed living in the area where the school was. I'd work delivering pizza or something, but I would just continue to go to college parties. And that was fine until people got tired of me being around because I was, not behaving myself. There was a lot of drinking and the drug use, of course. After about 4 more years of that, I guess we're up to about 1991. Something inside me, I said, you know what, I can't continue to live like this. Friends were graduating, they were going off and getting jobs, and I had just classic failure to launch. Like I just didn't do anything. So I said, you know what, and I had gained weight. I maxed out, I weighed like 250 pounds at my peak. And I said, something has to stop. So one day I went outside in the little urban neighborhood I was in, and I put on a pair of jogging shoes and I just ran around the block. Which was funny because the kids were sitting out on the stoop and they were making fun of me when I walked by because I was this giant lumbery guy that they used to see smoking on the front stoop all the time, and they couldn't quite, get their heads around what they were seeing. But I kept it up, and I stopped drinking, I stopped smoking, stopped doing any kind of drugs, and I started running like a madman. Lost like 65 pounds, became a vegan, and I thought, man, I have this whole thing locked tight. I'm fine, But when you're that age, when you're like in your early 20s, it's just so much harder to maintain any kind of, sobriety or anything when everybody around you, especially if you live in a city like New York, is just going out all the time. Everybody's out partying, and you don't want to be the stick in the mud who's just kind of like, I can't do anything. So, after a good stretch of sobriety, I didn't go to AA. I didn't do anything like that. It was purely self-directed. And in a time before there was anything other than AA, really, it was just, a lot of, maybe there was some self-help books or whatever. But certainly nothing like the resources you have today with like, This Naked Mind or any of the other programs out there that are non-12-step based. So, I eventually sort of drifted back into drinking in the mid 90s. And at the same time, I was going back to school. I was working during the day, going full time at night. So my drinking was sort of tempered by the fact that I had sort of rearranged my priorities to the point where I had put work and, trying to be responsible at the top, and trying to confine the alcohol to weekends and nights and basically any time I could slot it in, that it wasn't really interfering with anything. Although of course it was interfering, because it was basically all of my free time that I wasn't working or in school. I'd just be drinking. So I remember those years as just a grind, just between the drinking at night and the working during the day and the school and everything. It was just like, I just wanted to get through it. And then I had one particularly bad night where I went out, had a lot to drink, found a guy on the Lower East Side where I was living at the time in Manhattan, bought some drugs, and then stayed out for like a day and a half. And I got back from that escapade, and I realized that, the illusion of control was that I had some. I didn't really have any. So at that point, I had a few friends who I used to run with back in the 80s. And I called one of them up and I said, listen, you've been sober for whatever it is, 10 years now. How did you do it? And he took me to an AA meeting. And so I went to an AA meeting. This is, I don't know, mid 90s or so. And, I was like, well, this is interesting. I found it to be helpful at first because I was just so desperate. I was just grasping at anything, which I think a lot of people who end up going to AA, that's sort of the position they find themselves in. Like, that's what's on offer. There's a room full of people that are willing to help you. Why not engage with it? And so I did engage with it. But I engaged with it for 90 days, do 90 meetings in 90 days. I was like, fine, I'm going to do that. So I did that. On the 90th day, I'm like, well, okay, I guess I've graduated the program now. I must not have a drinking problem since I was able to stop so quickly. And I think on the 91st or the 92nd day, I went out and just, carried on as before. But there's a saying in AA that, the absolute worst thing that you can have is a belly full of booze and a head full of AA, because you have the fact that you're not drinking, quote unquote, normally, whatever that is, front and center in your mind, and that you have some kind of a problem, and that you have, you shouldn't be doing this. It's easy to sort of stuff that voice down and replace it with your own, mental tricks or whatever, cause you to, how it is, this naked mind is all about the subconscious and how that's driving everything. And definitely all those patterns and everything that were still there, were driving the bus. So, but I was still managing to hold it together with work and so forth. So I decided that I graduated college. It took me like 10 years because I was going at night. But I said, you know what, maybe I should just go to law school and see how that goes. And, I didn't really know what else to do. And I don't think I'm the only person that's ever gone to law school as sort of like, I don't know what else to do. So 1997, I went to law school, and a lot of the people who I went there with were considerably younger than me, by about 5 or 6 years, I guess. Maybe that's not considerably, but so they were still in, high party mode. So I just sort of fell back into that pattern. I would go, they had a free keg for law students every Thursday night at this bar. And so everybody would go there Thursday night and they would drink the free keg. And of course, nobody left after that one. You just stay for like, 5 or 6 hours and drink the rest of the kegs that were there that you had to pay for. So after law school, I got through law school, did very well in law school, even though I was drinking far more than I should be. And I started a job working for the city of New York. And the week that I started was 9/11. And the morning of 9/11, I was down in that, I worked in that neighborhood, and we were supposed to have our picture taken with the mayor that day. So I was late because the night before I had been out till 2 o'clock in the morning. And so 9/11 was on a Tuesday. So that would have made that a Monday night. So this is far before I decided to do anything like trying to moderate my drinking. I was just like, oh, it's Monday. In New York City, Monday's a good excuse to go out, I guess. I don't know. You can always find one. So I was very hungover for 9/11. But unfortunately, I was down there and I saw a lot of really awful things that day. And it kind of sent me off into a spiral for a couple of years where my drinking just really went through the roof.
When you emailed in, you said you were 1 block from.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a block away. I was actually walking out of the building to see what was going on at the Trade Center when the second plane hit. And, the glass in the building across the street shattered. I saw the reflection of the explosion in the glass, and a piece of the plane landed about, 50 yards away from where I was standing after ripping through the building next door. So that, yeah, it was very disturbing. And then standing out there, and you've seen the videos, unfortunately, of the people who were jumping out of the buildings, and to see that in person was a whole different layer of it was an awful day. Walked back to Brooklyn that night, and of course then went out with some friends, and we stayed out till 7 o'clock in the morning the next morning, just sort of drinking away or trying to drink away the trauma, which, doesn't, of course that never works. But at the time, I really didn't have the tools to think of it that way. So after a couple of years, and it was starting to affect my work at this point, because we were out of the office that we were in, because the building we were in actually was damaged in the attacks. So they moved us around. So we were in different offices trying to work without files. It was a very difficult period to be a city attorney, because we had no resources to work with and everything. And everybody I was working with who was there that day was pretty much in the same boat that I was. I mean, I don't think there was a lot of healthy coping that was going on after that event. I mean, most of my coworkers and I would go out like 3 or 4 nights out of the week and just sort of sit in bars until 11 o'clock, go home, wake up, do the whole thing all over again. About 2 years in, I decided maybe I need to get some help for this PTSD, which is what I had self-diagnosed myself with. Not that I had an alcohol problem, I had PTSD. So I went to see a therapist, and, we went, had the first meeting, and then the second meeting, he said, I made some offhand comment about going out and maybe I'm drinking a little too much. And he said, well, how much do you drink? And I said, I have about 8 pints. And he's like, a week? I said, no, like a night. He's like, how many times a week do you do that? I said, I don't know, 5, 6. He said, I think you have an alcohol problem. And I said, what? An alcohol problem? My problem is that I have PTSD from 9/11, or, this trauma from other areas of my life, from all that drug seeking behavior I did in the 80s. And he said, listen, I want you to go to an AA meeting. And I was like, listen, I've been there, I've done that. And he's like, oh, so you do have a drinking problem. You have a drinking problem. And I just kind of blew him off. And that was the last time I went to see that therapist. I mean, I was done with him, because the last thing I wanted to do was get my head around the fact that I needed to, revisit the issue of my drinking. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, well, okay, I have a good job. I'm doing okay. I'm not the best, lawyer. I'm no Clarence Darrow, but I'm holding my own. Why stopping drinking just seemed like, the idea just seemed ridiculous to me. Like there was no way that could ever happen. So I just carried on, and it's funny. Lawyers drink a lot, right? And so I left the city. I went to a private firm, and all those guys drank a lot too. But the funny thing is, I realized, like, I had friends in other industries, in banking and in advertising and all this, and every single one of them says, yeah, our business, like, everybody drinks too much. And I'm thinking, is there a single business besides the rehab business that is not known for excessive alcohol consumption? It's everywhere, And I remember at the time kind of noting that, like, with a chuckle, like, yeah, okay. Lawyers drink a lot, bankers drink a lot, stockbrokers drink a lot, everybody drinks a lot. And in New York City, it's kind of like the town sport, I guess you'd call it. I think you worked in New York, didn't you? So you know, like, what that's like, out every night. And I went to the firm. You do conduct a lot of business in bars, and so it seemed like a natural environment for me. I was extremely gregarious. I was able to talk to people. The thought of meeting with clients and doing that without alcohol was kind of terrifying. So I just kind of carried on, but I didn't feel like I was engaged in my life. I was married. My relationship was fine. My wife drank a lot too. She was also an attorney, and so if we weren't drinking with people from my job, we were drinking with people from her job, and it just sort of seemed like the normal way to live. The hangovers were getting worse every year that went by, but I had sort of, I guess, resigned myself to, like, this is just the way my life is. At work, drinking at night, crushing hangovers, spending the weekend completely useless and not doing anything. And the job was very stressful to boot. I remember reading something a couple of years ago where someone said, when you get out of school or graduate school, you can go one of two ways. You can either stop drinking and sort of, not do that sort of thing, or you can turn pro. You can become a professional drinker. And that was the choice that I had sort of taken for myself. So now I'm up to about 2006. My wife got pregnant. We'd been trying to have a child for a while, and it wasn't working. She got pregnant. She quit drinking right away. And I actually, my level decreased quite a bit because, I didn't want to, leave her at home and I'd be out carousing around. I mean, I was still drinking at work stuff. But I would say probably 50, 60% less than I was beforehand. And that reduction just I started thinking about that and how like I was able to do more things. My life was starting to look a little different and a little more pleasant. And I thought, well, maybe after the baby's born, maybe we can try a dry month or something. This is what was going around. And then the night that she had the baby, she had a preeclamptic issue and ended up having a stroke and dying as my son was being born. Now, there's really nothing that can possibly prepare you for something like that happening to you. And I, at first, did not know. I had no idea how to deal with that, how to process it, how to even engage with it. When you see your life going in one direction and then an hour later it's going completely the other direction. And I would like to say that was like the point at which I decided that I was going to stop drinking and get my shit together because I was responsible for another human being. But there was no way that I could have at that time just sort of taken away the thing that at the time I perceived was the only thing that was holding me together. So I was a good parent at that time to my son. I did not let the alcohol get in between that relationship. But it was definitely there, and I had switched jobs, and the job involved a lot of travel. So at the same time, I had to arrange for care for my son while I was on the road. When I was on the road, I would kind of let loose because that's really the place that I could do it. And fast forward, it was the worst year of my life. It's hard to communicate to somebody else exactly how difficult that year was, but it was very difficult. But at the end of that year, I met a woman who I became remarried to, my wife now, Erin, and it sort of began the process of me really examining more stuff internal and how I was going to create a life, which is basically a second life. I had this entire first life. I had been with my first wife from the end of college all the way through when she passed away. And then, I have this intermediary year, and then all of a sudden I have this new life. And my wife, Erin had a son from a previous marriage. And so he, joined, we just made a family together after a year. And at that point, I was able to take the drinking, and I was still drinking a lot on the road, but at home, I was saying, okay, a glass of wine a night, maybe two. And I was able to do that, and it was fine. But, it wasn't fine because always in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, that's 2 glasses, but they were kind of small glasses. Maybe I could have 3 if I'm using the small glass. And so alcohol occupied this outsized, thing in my head, this outsized area in my head that it started to really bother me. And I would go on these business trips. And, you always go out to dinner, and there's drinking at dinner, there's drinking before dinner, there's drinking after dinner. And, then I'd have to get up and I'd go I'd go mediate a case, after having drank like 7 or 8 drinks the night before. And I know I wasn't as sharp as I could have been otherwise. I mean, the only saving grace is everybody else around me was probably just as, hungover as I was. But, using the lowest standard as the standard isn't really the way to live your life either. So, so it took another decade before. So now we're up to 2000 and at 17, 18, where I really started making a concerted effort to start to address alcohol as the issue that it had become. So I would set up the rules. Everybody knows the rules. No drinking, just drink on Thursday, Friday, or whatever, Saturday, or no drinking at home, only drinking when you're on the road, or no drinking on the road, only drinking when you're home, or, and, 9 times out of 10, the same day I set the rule was the day that I broke it. And that's when I started realizing that even, even though my alcohol consumption at the time that I quit was moderate by historical standards of my own life, it still was it required too much mental energy. It was always in my head. Am I going to drink tonight? Am I going to get a bottle of wine? And I'd have to get a bottle of wine every night. And I was picking restaurants based on whether or not they had, whether they served alcohol or not, yeah. So, I mean, was there a bottom? I mean, I like to think like, rather than like one bottom, I always use the analogy of like an anchor that's sort of skipping along the bottom. Like every once in a while I hit a bottom and then I bounce back up and hit a bottom and bounce back up. And, you can go on like that for a very long time, especially if you're telling yourself that, this is just the way it is. This is how everybody drinks. This is what everybody does. And, to do anything else would be crazy. Right. So we went on a little trip in July of 2019, the family and we went to a cabin in upstate New York, and we got a couple of bottles of wine as we usually do. And we had a family Monopoly game. And I just, at the end of the night, like I had drank so much that when I woke up the next morning with a horrible hangover, I didn't remember the end of the Monopoly game. And that scared me because I never really had maybe if I'd been blacking out since I started drinking, I would have been able to, pull the plug on the drinking long beforehand, but I never did. Blackouts was never something that really happened to me. And I don't know if what happened to me that night was a blackout or what it was, but it scared me enough that I said, you know what, I think I need to put the alcohol down. I need to put it off to the side, and I need to really work on not drinking anymore. And I had a few fits and starts with that over the previous couple of years. I'd get a month in or I'd get 2 months in. I'd take, I'd do a 30-day challenge. I guess the 1 year no beer people like had me kind of roped into them for a while, and, I'd be able to get through 30 days, but then I was always like, screw it. You get a case of the Effets and just go right back. I didn't really see any like reason, which is so weird in hindsight. I started looking for stuff out there, podcasts mostly, because I listen to a lot of podcasts. And I came across, first one I came across was, I think, Recovery Elevator, Paul Churchill's thing. And that, great guy, great podcast. And I think one of the people that he had on there mentioned your book. I was also very active in the Stop Drinking subreddit on Reddit. And God bless those people. That resource was probably the thing that did more than anything else to kind of get me pointed in the right direction. And I still anybody that comes up to me now and asks me for a resource, I say, go there, read people's stories, read what they're doing, because it's not a lot of these places or internet chat groups or whatever, it's all 12-step, it's straight AA. And that really didn't hold much of an appeal to me. But anyway, so Paul Churchill had a guest on, and in the Stop Drinking subreddit, your book kept coming up, and This Naked Mind, and the idea of This Naked Mind. And I checked, and lo and behold, you had a podcast. And, that's great. So I started listening to the podcast, and that sort of brought me to the book, and I started reading the book. And I tell you, Annie, the first time I picked up that book and started reading it, I would run. So I would listen to it as an audiobook as I was running. And, it was like epiphany after epiphany in terms of like how I started to think about how alcohol got to occupy the space in my head that it did. And it really is this weird combination of social pressure and these shared accepted norms that really have no basis in reality, and like this idea that all the things that you think alcohol is doing for you, and actually it's doing the exact opposite. But I mean, to bring that out from, you know, your lizard brain, like into the light, you need somebody to sort of to say, you know, look at this and look what's happening. And, you know, and I did, and I started looking at it, and, you know, the thing that I took away, like my big takeaway early on from this Naked Mind, was the idea that, you know, sobriety is not a state of deprivation. It's not like I can't have this. It's not, it's a state of like abundance. Like I can have all this other stuff. Like all I have to do is not do this one thing. And then life, you know, gets better. And I locked onto that idea really hard. And that was extremely helpful to me. You know, and as was like all the, you know, science and the research that you did for that book. And, you know, I never really thought about the way alcohol is marketed. I never really thought about, you know, the way it's sort of pushed forward at every opportunity. It's made a part of every celebration. It's like so woven into the fabric of society, and there really is no reason for it. And that, you know, it was a light bulb moment, as they say in like Recovery Elevator. The light bulb moment in my sobriety was realizing that, you know, sobriety is a state of, you know, grace, and you know, and alcohol is not what you think it is, you know. And I still feel funny, you know, telling people at work, you know, I'm not drinking, and you know, I quit. When did I quit? In the late summer of 2019, so before the pandemic. Which, thank God, you know, because, you know, there's a lot of people out there that you know, you just look at the statistics, you look at overdoses, you look at alcohol abuse, and this rise of liver disease in people through the pandemic, and it's just been astronomical. But, you know, the one saving grace of the pandemic for me, or one of them, was that, you know, work travel basically disappeared. So, you know, I didn't have to go out and try and be social and all this stuff. I had maybe like a 6-month period of that before the pandemic, between when I quit. And 30 days in, I had to go to a conference on an industry group and give a presentation. And I, you know, have given presentations in the past. It's something that I do. And I don't think I'd ever done one without being either hungover or I don't think I usually would, you know, do nips before the presentation. Usually they were in the morning, and I was never really a morning drinker guy. But, you know, doing that without any sort of, because even a hangover is like an altered state. It alters your perceptions and in some ways, like I would go to court and I would argue motions hungover, and I found it almost easier than if I hadn't been drinking at all. I don't know if that makes any sense, but while simultaneously increasing my level of anxiety. So I don't really know how that works, but I would get much more anxious about these presentations. But anyway, so I went to that conference, I did this one, and I was able to string thoughts together more articulately. I didn't have to stare at a script. I could sort of extemporaneously speak. And that was a new thing for me. And I went to the dinner afterwards. I didn't drink. I was still at the point where I felt like I needed to disguise the fact that I wasn't drinking. So I'd go out and I'd get a ginger ale. I tell the guy to put it in a rock glass with a twist of lemon, you know, so it looked like a thing of scotch. And then it occurred to me the other day how insane that is, that like, I'm trying to just, you know, I don't want anyone to know I'm not using drugs, right? Like I'm not using a drug. But I mean, that's the way society looks at alcohol now. You know, it's the only drug you have to justify not using, right? So the other thing that the pandemic did for me is it allowed me to sort of find a few other people in my town who were in a similar situation. I belong to a bunch of these groups on Facebook. I think This Naked Mind and Recovery Elevator, and I saw a guy I knew who our kids were friends, had had liked one of those pages. So I kind of reached out to him on the side. I said, "Oh, hey, I see you're interested in Recovery Elevator." And that led to a discussion, and we sort of felt each other out, and we realized that we both had something in common. And he struggled with drugs, and for me it was alcohol. Well, he was alcohol and drugs too. And we got together and we tried to figure out how we could. He wasn't really a fan of AA either. Every time he went to AA, it would end up sending him back out to drink. So we decided that we would maybe, for accountability, we'd start our own podcast. And so we did. And, it's Recovery in the Middle Ages, we call it, because we're both middle-aged. And I think people who come into the Middle Ages, they have a different set of challenges and a different set of strengths than kids maybe who get sober at 19 or 20. And I'm happy that so many kids now seem like they are getting sober at 19 and 20. It seems like the idea of not wasting your youth in bars has become like a cultural touchstone, and that's great. But there's a lot of people from like Gen X and my era and a few years younger than me who have now reached the age where they're wrestling with addiction issues and are not so comfortable in AA. So anyway, we started this podcast, and it's been going very well. We have listeners, and what it really, the best thing for us is it's like accountability. Like we're accountable to each other. We work on this thing all week. So we don't go to AA meetings, but our recovery is always, it's there in the forefront of our heads because we're always thinking about it and we're always talking about it. And once a week we sit down and talk to other people about it. So, I attribute Recovery in the Middle Ages to helping me maintain my sobriety. And I know my partner feels the same way. But on the other hand, it's like, I feel almost guilty because I don't feel like I need to go out and drink. I have this feeling like it's the last thing in the world I want to do. And I never felt that way coming out of a 12-step meeting. I always felt like, there's something wrong with me. I have this thing inside me that makes and I always felt like why can't I be like a normal person? And, it was just getting away from that and getting more into something, the thought process that goes on with like This Naked Mind and other like cognitive behavioral therapies, where you start to realize that, you don't, there's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with the stuff that's going on outside of you, and maybe your subconscious has just found a maladaptive way of dealing with this substance that, is dangerous, poisonous, and addictive. And you need to just start to untangle some of that stuff, So.
That's awesome. So Recovery in the Middle Ages, is it on like Apple and?
Oh yeah.
All the places?
Sorry. Yeah, it's you can find it anywhere. Our website is middleagesrecovery.com, and you can, go there and find a link to the our most recent episodes. But we're on Spotify and Stitcher and Apple Podcasts, everywhere fine podcasts are sold. You can find us, and if you can take something out of that helps you, then great. I encourage you to come and check it out. We have different, sometimes we have guests, sometimes we just talk. We did a three episode series on This Naked Mind. So for anybody listening to this, if you want to sort of get our take on that book in even greater detail, feel free to check that out. It's a labor of love. We don't do it for money. Somebody once said to me, podcasting, there's tens of dollars in podcasting. You should do it.
Yeah, that's true. That's funny. I wanted to back all the way up. I had one follow-up question,
Sure.
Which was, when you said your first time you ever drank, it just like, made you feel like a superhero and really good. I often hear that when someone has dealt with a lot of anxiety or intensity in childhood. Do you find
Hmm.
that to be true for you, or?
Yes. My childhood was a little, it wasn't, I mean, my parents, I was adopted when I was 6 months old. So, a lot of adopted people, my experience has been from talking to them and from my own experience that there is a sort of feeling, I don't know if I want to call it a lack, but just like it's difficult to feel like you feel at home anywhere. Um, that, and my mother had a bit of a drinking problem herself. Her and my father were sort of the Mad Men generation. So there was a lot of that sort of drinking going on, cocktails, in the afternoon and the early evening. But I think it got away from my mother a little bit because there were a couple of times that I discovered, empty vodka bottles under the bed and so forth. And it made her a little erratic in terms of how she dealt with us as kids. And, having an alcoholic parent, and I've explored, adult children of alcoholics and so on, you know, that also, that feeling like you never know what you're going to get from a parent is also very destabilizing to a child.
Yeah.
And so that was always an anxiety. And then, at school, I was always a little heavy and I got picked on. And so that was another issue. I mean, so when I got to high school, and I started drinking there, I felt like I fit in. Exactly. It was like I could finally fit in. I felt comfortable in my own skin, really, where I
Yeah.
hadn't before.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I think it's so interesting because I do, if you were to broad type experience into two different buckets,
Mm-hmm.
there's people who drink and they're like, whatever, what was that all about? And generally there's not a lot of natural anxiety or uneasiness in their lives. So there's nothing that the alcohol is actually medicating.
Right.
And so then they come back to it in later life and it just becomes like, then they're stressed and they're working, that was very
Mm-hmm.
much my experience. Or it's that first drink is kind of like, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
And that is often because there's a lot of uneasiness in, and it doesn't have to be from anything traumatic, by the way. I think that one of the real true disservices we do ourselves in general when we're on this journey of kind of like self-awareness is the voice in our head that says, well, it wasn't as bad as that. Well, at least I had parents. Well, I wasn't in an orphanage. Well, and like that voice, it doesn't do anybody any good. All it does is disallow you from actually exploring what your experience was.
Right.
Because to be honest, like it's all relative. So somebody could have this idyllic childhood and then have something relatively minor happen, but because they have no tolerance for it and they have no scaffolding for anything painful, it can be very traumatic. Whereas somebody could have a very traumatic childhood and they could actually, have built tools to cope in a way that, so this idea of comparison, I find myself doing it all the time. Well, it wasn't that bad, especially
Right.
when you start to like look back at your childhood. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that. That's really helpful. Interesting.
Yeah, trauma it's a lot of it's in the eye of the beholder, especially childhood trauma. I was speaking to a therapist who said, she who deals with a lot of addicted people, and she said, you ask people, well, how was your childhood? And they say, oh, it's fine. I had a great childhood. Never, it was idyllic almost. And then you ask a few more questions, like, or the big question that she would ask is, how would you raise your children differently than you were raised? And then it all comes out how messed up their childhood was, and because you may not even be aware of the trauma. It may just be
And we
sort of
try to protect our parents, by
right.
the way.
Yes.
Like that is our default nature,
Mm-hmm.
is that we have to protect them at all costs. And so,
Right.
so even the idea that something might have been amiss or that they didn't do exactly how we would have done it is a terrifying idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so it prevents us, I think, from discovery. But the way through that is really being able to be curious without blame. And I think that's a level of kind of emotional development that you have to come to. And it's very hard to do while you're still in the midst of using substances, by the way, because like either the pendulum swings to the place where you're, okay, I get it. I had a crappy childhood, but then all of it is blame and none of it is responsibility. And then you get into this very, very nasty blaming place, which gives you no power. It actually steals all of your power. Or you get into this place, and I've been there for years. I mean, how's your childhood? Oh, it was great. And then only in like the last year or so, going through some deeper work, I'm like, wow, there was moments where that wasn't great, and that wasn't great, and that wasn't great. And so it's so fascinating once you allow that, like, you're human, your parents are human, they're fallible, and that's okay. And you don't have to blame them, and you don't have to be mad at them, and you don't have to make them wrong, but you can also accept that that did impact you. And that kind of balancing act is really fascinating.
It is. But the thing is, you're never going to be able to get to that level of clarity if you're still drinking, or if you're using any kind of a substance, because you just can't even engage with that part of your brain. You will fall into a blame cycle, and you will harbor a lot of anger for your parents.
Yeah.
I did.
Which will probably make you drink
years.
more, because you feel even more powerless when you're blaming. I mean, you by default put yourself in a victim position, which is not a powerful position, doesn't have any agency. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true.
It is.
Well, this has been really great. I mean, you're a phenomenal storyteller, the whole arc of it, and then going into details of certain areas. It's really been so good, and such a just honest, vulnerable story. So thank you for that.
Well,
I want to ask you though.
Let me thank you, because I don't think I would be sitting here having a coaching conversation like this, or have been able to do any of the internal work that I have been doing, had it not been for This Naked Mind, had it not been for your podcast, and had it not been for the work that you put in. And I'm sure you hear this fairly often from people, but I cannot thank you enough for the way you've really just changed the whole way people look at alcohol and how people recover. I mean, the more work I do internally, the more I realize how big your contribution to this space has been.
Well, thank you so much. That's really awesome. I appreciate it. Yeah, I definitely appreciate it. And it was interesting to feel, it's so great sometimes to feel on this side of the whole arc of the journey. And, it's a never ending journey. So I guess there's not really sides, but feeling very much on an island when I first published the book. And
I'll bet.
What is happening? I'm not, and by the way, I thought that I was in the like, okay, we're all stopping drinking, there's one island, and I just got on it. And then I got on it and I discovered that, like, I was by myself. Like, there was another island of a certain way you did it. And it was this whole really interesting, intense experience. But so I really appreciate that, and to see that was worth it, in the lives. Like, it's wonderful to hear. So that's just awesome. So let me ask you the question that I ask at the end. If you were going to go back, to Mark, who, I love the analogy of the anchor hitting bottom and keeping it going. And you were going to try to tell him about, like, how your life is today and what things are like now. What would you say?
Well, that's a tough question, because people take 0% of the advice that that they don't ask for, and that includes from future me, I would think. I would try to tell past Mark that maybe you could accelerate the program of trying to work through your issues without having all those years in between. I don't consider everything that you've done, I would say to me, none of it is wasted time. Life is a learning experience, and there are incidents that I regret, but I don't regret the way I live my life, and that things get better, and that on the other side of the struggle is a life that you can't even dream of at this moment, but it's a great life. So I don't know. That's what I tell him.
I love that.
I don't know if you believe me. I wouldn't have at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about that question, but I do like it, because there are lots of people who are actually listening. And I mean, this podcast has close to 100,000 downloads a week now.
Wow.
And so, like, there's a lot of people who actually want that advice and are saying, hey, well, I want to know what the view is from that side after the work is put in and stuff. And so that's really powerful.
Well, I have hobbies, I have interests, I have a great, beautiful family. My wife and I get along wonderfully well. My children are wonderful. I mean, just if you're listening and you're even thinking about, do I have a drinking problem or should I stop drinking? The answer is yes. And your life will get immeasurably better. That's all I can say.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. It's just really been fun. I appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you, Annie.
Hi, it's Annie Grace. I wanted to interrupt this podcast, I guess the end of this podcast, to say that if you're totally serious about actually and truly and forevermore transforming a relationship with alcohol, really leaving it behind in the rearview mirror for once and forever, and changing your psychology about it, we have a program called The Path that I've created specifically for you. Now, it's not for you if you're still dabbling or trying to figure out where you want to be, or maybe even if you still want to moderate. All those things are fine. That's great. But if you're beyond that and you're like, no, I just want to be done with this. I'm ready to invest some time and I'm ready to just make this happen. I want the answer. I want the easy way out. Then I want you to check out nakedmindpath.com and join us in the path, where you receive coach-guided and community support so that you can truly make this lasting change that you want in your life. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.